Hello and welcome to today's lesson on measurements of spread for distributions. In our last lesson, we looked at the measures of center. Mean, median, and mode are all ways of finding central tendency values. But today we're going to look at how do we find measures for a data set that talk about the spread of the individual values. Okay, so we talked about mean, median, and mode, central tendencies, but now when we look at measurements of spread, how spread out are the individual values? Our measurements of spread are range, the distance between the maximum and minimum value, the interquartile range, okay, which is the distance between quartile 1 and quartile 3, okay, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then our last measurement of spread is standard deviation. Standard deviation is finding the average of the distance from each value from the mean value. So when we look at standard deviation, okay, a fairly large formula dealing with each individual value. So we would have to take each x minus the average, square it, so the distances don't cancel each other out, add them all up, and once we added that all up, we would divide by the number of values, and then we would finally square root it to get it back into a normal unit value. Now, the good news is we're just showing this formula to show you what you could do, okay? But we will be using the calculator to find the standard deviation of any individual value overall. Now, when we look at distributions, what might you have to do by hand? We can require you by hand to find what we call the 5-number summary. Okay, task number 1, make sure all of your values are organized from low to high, because then the minimum is easy to find, the maximum is easy to find. Okay, now our next step is finding the median value. Okay, we're working to the middle, taking 1 off of each end until we find the middle value, which is our median. Okay, now if your median is a value in the data set, we leave that value out when we're finding our quartile 1 and our quartile 3. And what we do is all values below your median, we're going to find another middle value. So 19, 28, and now we have to find the middle of 24 and 25. Okay, so we average those two, 24 plus 25 divided by 2, and we get 24.5 for this first quartile. When we go to quartile 3, same thing on the upper piece. We're going to average 35 and 36 to get 35.5. Okay, if we're asking you to do this by hand, these numbers are going to be very easily solved for values. Okay, now, why are they called quartiles? If you remember, the median is the 50% mark of your data. Half of your data is below, half of your data is above. Well, the quartiles just break it up even smaller into 25% chunks. So what we're doing is we're dividing up our distribution into 4 semi-equal, hopefully they're equal. It's always based on the data set size, okay, but we're looking at 4 equally distributed pieces overall. Okay, so now we've created this 5-number summary, describes our data and how it's spread out really well. Okay, some of our other calculations, range. Remember, range is your maximum minus the minimum value. Okay, so we get a range of 17. I just did 36 minus 20. Okay, I had to tack 1 on extra overall. Interquartile range, the distance between the upper quartile and the lower quartile. How many values are in between these two? And we have 11. Okay, now standard deviation, something that we can't calculate by hand, so we have to use our calculator to do that. Now, to do this in the calculator, okay, 19 and 24 are our first two values. I'm going to move this guy over here. Okay, and we want to look at our data list, and we're going to enter in that data that we're given. 19, enter, 24, enter, and I'll show you where I got to this screen. Okay, to get to this screen, you have to use the stat button and then enter at edit, and that gets you into these values. Okay, 25, 28, 30, 33, 35, 36, and 36. Okay, now notice I've got an extra value here from an old data set, and I just want to delete that value overall. Okay, make sure that you have your data set matching exactly what you see in the distribution. Now, to get our standard deviation, we're going to use stat, and we're going to go to calculate heading, and what we want is the one variable statistics, that first selection. Make sure your data is in list 1, then you don't have to worry about these entries. If you have the old operating system, you just hit enter and it does this for you. And this gives us a lot of information. Okay, so when we look at the information that we get here, we've got our average, which is the X bar. And then our standard deviation is not the S of X right now. It is what we call sigma X, because standard deviation is a Greek value in its truest state. Okay, so our standard deviation is 5.68 units. Okay, now, if we give you a value or set of values that is an even numbered distribution. Once again, remember your rules. Are they organized from lowest to highest? Okay, to find our 5-number summary, we're taking 1 off of each end, working our way to the middle. Okay, our median value is in between two values at 88. Now, when I'm finding my quartiles are the median of all values below the median and all values above the median. Okay, and once again, we're just working our way in to find that central value, and that becomes our quartile value. Okay, so remember, you might have to find a 5-number summary by hand. Okay, and that's how we would do it. It's a little bit different depending on whether it is an even set of values or an odd set of values. Okay, so once again, finding all of our critical values, our range, upper value minus lower value. Okay, we've got a range of 30 units in between those two values. Okay, inner quartile range, 95 minus 79, not 78. Okay, so we've got 15 equals 16. And then standard deviation is something that we use the graphing calculator to find. Okay, we input that in, and here are the directions that you would use, the steps you would use to find those specific values. And as we go through, okay, we enter in the data table, we use our calc one variable stats, make sure that we're talking about list 1, and then remember all of our values here. Here's our average, here's our standard deviation, and if you notice, if you arrow down, it also gives you the 5-number summary for those individual values. Okay, so that is our lesson for today. 5-number summary, measurements of spread. Our measurements of spread are range, inner quartile range, and then also standard deviation. Okay, the good news is for the work that we're doing, the graphing calculator is going to find the standard deviation for us. Thank you and have a good day.